Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to wait for 1 minute to allow participants to join, and then we will start. Thank you. We will start with Manny Oliver. Manny?
Yeah, thanks, Dina. And welcome, everyone. This is our phase one awardee webinar for those, and particularly oriented to those people who are new and haven't gotten an award from DOE in the past. We want to make sure you fully understand some of the requirements associated with getting a government award. So a large part of the presentation will be focused on both the administration of your grant with respect to receiving financial assistance from DOE and all the requirements that are associated with that in terms of what you need to report back to us. There's also a talk by Mike Dobbs. He'll be discussing some of the patent and data rights associated with SBIR and STTR awards. And that'll be kind of the bulk of the discussion today. I think just really understanding what your rights and responsibilities are there. Two other things, Dave McCarthy had a short presentation talking about some of the efforts a good bit of the focus of these programs is on commercialization. Even though we're funding to do research, Congress would like to see this research result in commercial products and services. So we do provide some assistance along that lines, and Dave will go into more detail about that. And then finally, one of the challenges with the program is occasionally we do see some fraud associated with the programs. And so we do want to make sure you understand your responsibilities with regard to that are what constitutes fraud, in terms of everything from duplicative applications and awards and things like that. So we'll have somebody from our office, an Inspector General, discuss that as well. So that should make you fully capable of understanding, and properly administering your own award. So let me just get started here. If you're new to DOE, one of the first questions you might have is, if I have questions, who are the right people to contact? You've generally been working with maybe probably our office, Office of SBIR and STTR programs, and submitting your application. But in terms of the actually administration of your award, anything about the financial side of your award, changes to personnel, budget, you'll actually be talking to your grant specialist, and this is a person who's going to reside in our Chicago office. And if you don't know who your grant specialist is, generally they should have been the person reaching out to you to help you finalize your award and get that issued. And if you still don't know who that is, you can send us an email or call us and we'll be able to get that information for you. There's also a DOE technical program manager associated with your award. So if you have anything you want to discuss about changing the direction of your project based on how the research is going and things like that, and really would like to revise that, that's something you should probably discuss with the DOE program manager as well. Again, if you don't know who that is, they were copied, when you were sent your award notice of award selection. They're the person who probably oversaw your topic. So when you submitted your application to your topic, there's a person there, and that's probably the person who was listed there. Sometimes there are changes, but generally that's who that would be. So, and again, any questions about anything, you can always contact our office at the email address and phone number there. I do want to just highlight before we get started, there were some changes to our programs in the last couple of years, and just want to make sure you're aware of that. Some of these, are included in the funding opportunity announcement, but just want to highlight those. So one is if you invent a technology under SBIR and STTR, the expectation is that technology must be substantially manufactured in the U.S. There can be exceptions to that. Mike Dobbs may touch on this a little further in his talk, but that is a new requirement for our program. Another new requirement Congress had concern about foreign relationships, and particularly, foreign countries perhaps, either stealing or acquiring technology that's developed under the SBIR and STTR programs. For that reason, you do have to include a disclosure of foreign relationships with your application, both phase 1 and phase 2. And the important thing I want to highlight here is you need to update that information during the award period, so you're not done when you submitted the application. So if there are any changes to your foreign relationships, please keep that in mind. And then finally, another change was implemented as part of that. Concern about foreign relationships is that you do need, if you put in your application personnel that such as a staff engineer or TBD, and that somebody joined your project later on, and this can include graduate students and postdocs at universities. If they were unnamed in your application and you add them to your award at a later date, you do need to notify your grant specialists of the change. Again, this is a change in personnel, and we will have to approve that before starting the project. So I just want to be aware of that requirement. Something new for 2024, Congress was also concerned about, again, security of the technologies developed under SBIR. So they are requesting that we understand your cybersecurity posture. So starting this year, we require phase 2 applicants to submit a cybersecurity self-assessment. That's a form that's available on our website. You'll describe, what practices you have in place. It's a checkbox form, so we will list the practices we expect you to have in place, and you will be indicating whether you have that fully implemented or in progress, and so on. So again, we will be looking at that as part of our examination of risk associated with your application. We do have some more information about that on our website, including some cybersecurity related information, educational, and we will also be, throughout the phase 1 period, we'll be starting to provide some education on the cybersecurity that will probably roll out this summer sometime. So be on the lookout for that. But that is something, as you involved in your phase 1, you probably want to implement during your phase 1 so that you have these practices in place by the time you apply for the phase 2. And for this group, you'll be applying for phase 2 in December of this year. And that is really it. I just want to highlight a couple other things. Sometimes we have people who want to take advantage of supercomputer resources, and we do make time available at no charge to SBIR and STTR awardees. So if your project happens to involve that, I just want you to make aware of that. We do have a number of partnering resources. I believe Dave is going to talk about this in a little more detail. So I'll probably just turn it over to him. I'll just stop here to see if you have any questions. I did see a couple came in this chat. So initial questions, yes, this will be recorded. And those of you who have registered for this will get a email indicating where you can find the recording. And what should I do if my grant specialist is not responding? You can always email us. And again, at the email address below, just indicating that you haven't heard or in a while and stuff like that, and we can help move that along. Some of you may not actually have your awards yet. Again, depending on any issues and stuff found in negotiation of your award before it's finalized. Some of you should have your award documents issued. Some of you may not at this time, but should be finalizing those in the next few weeks. Not seeing any other questions. I will turn it over to Dave.
Good. Thanks, Manny.
Okay, well, we just get one more question in. Sorry.
Oh, yep, sure.
Who is key personnel? So again, key personnel, basically people who contribute substantially to a project. And generally, they're going to be any engineer, scientist, PI associated with the, so employees of your firm that are working on this project in a substantial capacity. We are treating graduate students and postdocs, again, as if you have a subaward to a university and the primary work usually at the university is done by grad students and postdocs, they will also be treated as key personnel. And so you will have to, get those approved if they are not specified in your application. Somebody mentioned the phase 2 proposal we're doing October, not December of this year. I can double check that, but you should typically our schedule for phase 2s would be in December.
Yeah, I
October
think
is when the
it's
phase 1s are due.
Yeah, I think it's December 3.
Okay, yeah, I'm not looking at the actual webpage right now, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it should be, make sure you're looking at the phase 2, not the phase 1 for that. Okay, I'll turn it over to Dave now.
Good, thanks, man. If you stop sharing,
Yeah, I gotta do that. Yeah.
A couple of slides to go through. Let's see. There we go. All right. And so I'll pick up with just a couple of minutes talking about phase 1 commercialization programming. We're fully aware that the phase 1 grant, it's still fairly technical. It is a proof of concept, so still a lot of technical work to be done. From the SBIR office point of view, we try to provide programming that is at a similar level of progression, I'll say, to what you're doing technologically, to what you should be doing to begin the commercialization process of the technology that you're working on. It is a statutory requirement within the statute that defines the SBIR as TTR program that you do commercialize the technologies that you're working on. So for all of you, starting right now, you're sort of at point A with your grant start date. And I'll say for now, point B is your phase 2 application due date. And we run, I'll say, a very simple linear program to get you started along the commercialization path. About 2 months into your grant, we actually start the programming of phase shift. This is our version of what's called I-Core, if you've been through the National Science Foundation or other places, but this is our customer discovery program. About 4 months into your grant period, we'll have our principal investigators meeting, and I'll have a date for you here in a second. And then after the PI meeting, we have available for you technical and business assistance. Some of you might have put in $6,500 with your grant proposal and identified your own vendor. If not, no problem. We provide, you can kind of think of it as a backup vendor for you to take advantage of technical and business assistance services. And really the best way to think of those is as consulting services that you can use on a set of commercialization tasks to help you during the early commercialization process. One thing to think about or keep in mind as we get into TABA is that those services end, and it's either at the application due date or the end of your period of performance, whichever comes first. So just as we start making our way down that track, make sure you keep those dates in mind. But the goal with all of the commercialization programming is one, to have you have a winning commercialization plan for your company long term, but then that gets embodied in the phase 2 commercialization plan, which is a 15-page deeper document than you just wrote for your phase 1 application. And there's a lot more expectation going into a phase 2 that, just like you're moving your technology forward, you're moving the details of your commercialization forward as well. And I just got updates for the PI meeting. So that is going to be June 25th and 26th in Bethesda, Maryland. The signups for that will be coming out in about a month. I just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to dive into this first piece of the phase 1 commercialization program into phase shift. So again, this is our version of what other people call I-Core, but it's about an 8-week exploration of some very basic principles, like you're working on basic principles of your technology, some of the basic principles of your commercialization plan. And if you can answer these 3 questions by the end of phase shift, I think everybody would think it's a win. One is knowing who is your customer, not that you're going after manufacturing or medical, but that you actually know the people involved with the process. You know what problems they're trying to solve, not just the ones that you can solve for them, but the ones they're actively trying to solve, and then why they're trying to do that. So if you can come up with those 3 answers at the end of this 8-week exploration, that's a big win. Again, commensurate with the development of your technology, the commensurate level of development of your commercialization plan. And so how do we do that? So there's a certain amount of commitment that we expect from teams that come into the program, but a certain amount of funding that you get to go along with it. So we have in-person meetings for the opening and closing sessions. In between those sessions, we have 6 virtual sessions, report outs with coaches and additional training sessions. And also we expect teams to go out and listen to their customers 30 times. We call them interviews, but really it's mostly just listening to who's your customer, what are they trying to solve day to day, and why are they trying to solve it. And with that comes a $5,000 travel budget. So if you're in Chicago and you're trying to do, I'll say oil and gas, we can get you up and back to Houston as many times as your $5,000 travel budget can take care of, in addition to getting you to the in-person open and closes. For your cohort, the close is actually right adjacent to the PI meeting. So those dates I had on the earlier slide, the 25th and 26th, the closing session ends up being June 24th. So it's a nice way to kind of leverage that travel budget a little bit. That's the commitment and funding. And then my last bullet for this presentation are some very important dates. If you are even thinking about getting involved with the Phase Shift program, the application's open on Monday. So we'll have the final links up on Friday afternoon. The applications will actually be active on Monday. On March 6th and March 14th, we have info sessions, real time. Max Green will be in to do kind of give you the whole spiel, all the details, all the expectations, requirements of the programs, open Q&A for about a half an hour. The applications close on March 15th. Right after that, we'll do team selections, and then the program kicks off on April 30 with a 2-day program start. And as I mentioned, the program wraps up the day before the PI meeting in Bethesda. So that's all I wanted to cover for today for the commercialization planning. There's a lot more that sits behind this, but again, think of that linear path of phase shift to PI meeting to tab of services at this point, and really keying in on a successful commercialization plan in your phase 2 application. I'll put my email in the chat when I'm done, and I'd love to hear any more questions. We can certainly continue the conversation through the QA here once I stop. That's it for now. I'll pass it over to, I think it's going to, is it going to Mike? Who's up next?
Yeah, Mike Dobbs up next.
Okay. Mike, you're on mute.
All right.
There we go.
Good morning and good afternoon. Hopefully everybody can see my slides okay.
Okay, got it.
Perfect, thank you. Today I want to spend a few minutes talking about patent data rights, which arguably for commercialization and long-term viability of your companies, I think is one of the most important topics you'll have today. So important, I'm going to give a little bit of homework right off the get-go. I want to highlight that I'm not your attorney, but please talk to your attorney about intellectual property rights in general, as well as in regards to these award terms. As background, you're going to want to look at the SBA's policy directive. And then also when I'm talking here, I'm really speaking from my close to 20 years of experience now in providing intellectual property support of these awards. But obviously the governing guidance is going to be in your award terms and our official guidance. So let's get right into it. I have 3, and then I really have a bonus key takeaway. The first one is going to be properly mark your reports, right? And so if you're going to have your protective data markings, we'll get into that. Timely report all your subject inventions. Even if you're not going to pursue patent protection, you need to report these inventions. Watch out for those statutory bars. And then 4, as Mandy kind of gave you a sneak peek, the U.S. manufacturing is becoming a really big deal, actually, not only for this program, but for all of DOE. Last year, I think it was, we declared an exceptional circumstance to enhance manufacturing, but now it's gone even to the White House. There's been an executive order recently directing other agencies to do the same, to increase manufacturing expectations there. So before we dive into data rights, I wanted to kind of explain a little bit to those maybe unfamiliar with kind of the intellectual property distinction between copyright and patents in particular, the differences between these two. Copyright, that is kind of when you look at a magazine, a newspaper, but also things like your MP3s and music, right? That's original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression, right? It's fixed on that paper. Those disclosures to the government, just basically the deliverables, which for these awards, we're really talking that final technical report at the end. And then the government protection, if it's your privately funded data, and I'll get into what that means, you're going to have limited rights or restricted computer software. But if it's generated data, if you want the government to protect it, you're going to need to mark it. That's back to that number one. Now, patent rights, I'll get to those next. It's a little bit different. Unlike copyright, patent protection is not automatic. You're going to need to provide an enabling disclosure to the patent office, have a patent attorney draft up that patent application and get a granted patent to be able to enforce that. Now, it covers a new and useful process, machine, manufacture, composition of matter, or any new or useful improvement thereof. And then the disclosure here, it's all your subject inventions developed in the performance of this award need to be reported to DOE at any time. And then confidentiality, the goal here with those invention reports is that someone get patent protection on them so they are protected. So just setting up the ground here, when I say data, what I mean by that is not your research data, but all recorded information, regardless of form or method of recording. So that doesn't mean that your CO wants to see all the data reported. Again, when we're talking about deliverables, it's going to be that final technical report. And then privately funded data, that should really, for these awards, only be in your proposal if you choose to put it in there. There's a legend in there, but otherwise, DOE does not want any of your limited rights or restricted computer software, anything that was developed outside of this award with private funds. We don't want it. It should not be in your final technical report, and you really shouldn't be sharing it with us. So as far as data generated in the performance of this award, there's really two bins that it's going to fall into. The first one at the top is kind of the default bin. That's unmarked data, unlimited rights. And basically the government there has no obligation to protect, and our system will automatically publish your final tech reports at the end. And so this is kind of, it's really important in the government that we have this kind of automatic bin, because we have papers at our desks, right? And if there's no markings on it, we have things like the Freedom of Information Act to be able to release these documents unless there's some basis to protect them. So they need to be marked, and you underneath these awards, we have SBIR SCTR data protection, which gives you a nice 20-year data protection from the date of the award. So when you submit your final tech report, if you are using the SBIR SCTR data protection in ORISE, you're going to select that 20-year SBIR SCTR data rights. And then you're also going to put the appropriate legend on your final technical report. And you should do this before you send it to us. And by the way, if you have any progress reports, you should also put the appropriate markings on those as well. And then this is what that legend looks like. And when you submit it through ORISE, this is what it looks like. The key here is on where it says STI product type. There's the final SBIR SCTR final technical report. And then you're going to want to identify it as SBIR SCTR protected data. And that's the last box on the bottom of this slide. And just to highlight, we don't see a lot of this, but when you submit those final technical reports, there's limitations on what data. Obviously, you shouldn't have PII, you shouldn't have things like social security numbers. As I said, should not have limited rights data, so nothing, no privately funded data. Obviously, no classified information or information subject to export control. If you have any concerns with this, please reach out to the CO. And they should also not have any other markings, proprietary, confidential, business sensitive. The only markings, protective markings on your final technical report should be that SBIR SCTR legend, or no protective markings. A couple other things. If you want to put that little C with the circle, indicating that you have copyright to that, we do ask that you put in the government license on the document. That really helps us, because we do publish these, even if they're protected. After the protection period, they do go online, and we need to clarify what rights we have to publish that. Third-party copyrighted material, again, if there's an image or some chart or some writings that are not yours, please do not include in these reports. Again, we do publish these online. We cannot have third-party copyrighted material. And as I said, data generated with private funding should not be on these reports. And this last box here is kind of a reminder for you. These markings, when I talk about SCTR or SBIR, SCTR protected data markings, that's from disclosure outside the government. When you're working with others, you're going to want to work with your own counsel to come up with the appropriate markings. So data markings, common mistakes, sharing that data without the protected markings, using the wrong markings, confusing that privately funded data with the government funded data, adding the wrong legends on the final technical report, or putting that copyright notice without putting in the government license. So let's move over to patents here, and this is timely reporting all subject conventions. So the SBIR, SCTR data rights are kind of unique to these awards, but patent rights are basically uniform for small business nonprofits across the federal government. For 40 years, small business nonprofit entities have been able to retain title to their subject conventions under what's called the Bayh-Dole Act. And we're basically using the standard government terms. So that means when you are working with any other government agency receiving federal funds, you should typically receive these same rights. But it also means that your subs, if they're nonprofits or small businesses, should receive the same rights and should be able to elect title to their own inventions. And you cannot take that away as a condition of granting that award. And these standard terms do allow the small business nonprofits to retain title to their inventions, but there are certain requirements such as reporting the inventions, electing those inventions, right? And there are certain situations where the government may take title to those inventions. For example, if it's unelected or if it has been found to be an unreported subject invention. So invention here. What do I mean by invention? And I love this definition, and this is in your terms, it's in the statute. An invention means any invention or discovery which may be patentable. So fairly broad, you know, is when you, a common question is, you know, software, is software patentable? I think at this point in the United States, the patent attorneys don't have a good answer for that. So I would say, yes, it may be patentable. It's very broad. We don't want all your inventions. We only want the subject inventions reported. And that is an invention of the recipient conceived or first actually reduced to practice in the performance of the work. So that means it came up in your head or you first actually built it in the performance of this award. And this last bullet, it is in the standard terms, but it's just good practice that you have employment agreements with your employees, that they are reporting their inventions to you and that you have rights to those inventions. So the three big things for invention reporting, and you do this all with the interagency automated system called IATISN. So in the invention reporting phase, this is when you receive that invention disclosure from your inventor. You're going to report that to IATISN within 2 months of disclosure. And once you get in the system, you'll see where all the fields are. It's basically looking for the same Word or PDF file that you receive that describes the invention. You'll put it in there. After that, you have 2 years to decide whether or not this is an invention you want or not. And if you decide you want to keep it upon that election notice, which you're basically just changing a field in IATISN, you need to file that initial patent application. And all these time periods are extended. I'll show you a timeline in a minute here. So if you're not familiar with IATISN, or maybe you have some questions about IATISN, here's the website, but make sure, and these slides will be shared afterwards, to note Maritza's name. She is our lead, and she can walk you through the process and walk through any questions. So this is what the timeline looks for invention reporting. So all the way on the left here, you have the invention disclosure. And within 2 months, like I said, in 2 months of your office, whoever is responsible for receiving those, 2 months from the date that they receive it, they upload it into IATISN. They have that 2-year period to make a decision, 1 year to file that initial patent application. And then it kind of sits at the patent office until it's examined. Your patent attorney will probably do some office actions and it issues. Hopefully after you file, that's when you see publications, and we'll get to statutory bars later. And then you're also confirming the government's license in your invention with that confirmatory license. And the nice thing about IATISN is it automatically generate that form for you, so you just have to sign it. So patent filing, as I said, that needs to happen 1 year, within 1 year of election. You need to provide DOE with a copy. That's just a simple upload in IATISN. Provide that confirmatory license. Also notify us if you decide not to pursue patent protection. Typically, your outside counsel will be well aware of including the government interest clause in the application. And keep in mind, the USPTO does have micro entity and small business discounts. Is there a question? So patent cost allowability. This is kind of a somewhat of a newer thing underneath the tab of funds. For phase 1, $6,500 are available, and for phase 2, $50,000 are authorized to pay for patent prosecution costs. Now, these costs are only authorized for subject inventions of this award. So it needs to be an invention conceived or first reduced to practice in the performance of phase 1 or phase 2, this phase 1 or phase 2 award. At the end of the award, there's going to be one last period. As I said, it's very important that we report all subject inventions. There's a certification at the end just to kind of make sure that all the inventions have been reported. You'll list all the inventions, the identifiers and the titles, and we will help confirm that it is in the system.
And Mike, we did get one question about IATISN. I was told that DOE does not assign S numbers on IATISN anymore. Should we still report to IATISN?
Yes, 100%. DOE is using IATISN for all its invention disclosures now. We require everything be reported in IATISN. The S number, fun fact, the S stands for secret. It is a heritage, goes all the way back to the Manhattan Project. We do still assign those. Unfortunately, there is a delay in assigning those right now because there's a connection that's connecting IATISN to our internal docketing system, which generates those S numbers, and we're having issues with that connection. But continue to use the IATISN EIR numbers for your reporting needs. So as far as patent filings, I did cover all of this already. Okay. So statutory bars, this is really more to protect you. It's not really related to these awards, but it is super important to keep in mind what are the statutory bars, and that these are bars that prevent you from getting patent protections. And that covers anything that is patented, described in a printed publication, that could be your own publication, or, which could be kind of scary, that is in public use, and this is your own use, on sale, or kind of a catch-all here, otherwise available to the public. So keep these in mind and work with your counsel if you ever think you're going to kind of enter into one of these zones, because you can lose patent protection. And these statutory bars also should be entered into the IATISN system, so we can kind of make sure that there is going to be a filing that the government has an opportunity to review these if the recipient is not going to pursue patent protection. And then finally, the U.S. manufacturing requirements. This is somewhat new to the DOE. We've always had what's called U.S. preference, but over the last few years, we've increased our manufacturing requirements. You're going to want to look at the terms on that. But the key here is that all of these subject inventions need to be manufactured substantially in the United States. Now, I think DOE overall recognizes that may not always be possible and practical, but we do have a waiver process for that, and actually you could submit those in IATISN. We do have a U.S. manufacturing page, which is also linked here. in my experience, it's obviously best to wait closer to commercialization when we know where those supply chains are. But really, in my opinion, what DOE is looking for is U.S. manufacturing first in the United States. And this is the U.S. competitiveness provision that's in your award. So these are the 4 key takeaways I want you to leave with today. Properly mark your reports. Remember that SBIR CTR markings only. Timely report all those subject conventions. Super important, because once you put it in that ISN system, it'll generate notifications. You'll get emails saying this election's due, this filing's due. It'll walk you through the process. And if you need more time, just reach out to Maritza. Watch out for those statutory bars. This is to save you and DOE from losing valuable invention rights. And keep in mind the U.S. manufacturing requirements and consult DOE early with questions. So just a couple of bonus slides here before I leave. And working well with others, as I mentioned, keep in mind the flow down requirements for your subcontracts, but consider working with our laboratories. We have a pre-approved streamlined SPP, as well as we have user agreements. The user agreements, there's kind of 2 categories. There's the ones that are basically free, where there is not proprietary use. And then there are ones where you're using your private funds, not SBIR funds, to do proprietary, to have proprietary data, to have proprietary use of these user facilities. So I think that's all I have for today.
One question here about using TABA funds for patents in phase 1. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So phase 1, you're given 6,500. The problem with phase 1 is just the timing. So that invention needs to be made in the performance of that phase 1 award and then filed. So it's unlikely, and frankly, the $6,500 it's going to certainly help, but it's not really going to cover it. So phase 2 is when we would typically see the patent funds being used.
Yeah, I would indicate, you can work with maybe a patent attorney and other, or other places to do IPs, look at prior art and things like that. So those would also be allowable expenses in phase 1.
Yeah, 100%. I should have noted that. That's kind of the last bullet on this slide, that,
Okay.
IP and commercialization costs maybe allow like the freedom to operate, market analysis. I think that's a great use of the phase 1 funds.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have. So
Great.
thank you very much. And again, I know we're presenting information about patenting fairly early here before you even start your work. We just wanted to make sure you understood the requirements. And Mike and his team are available if you have any, when you're finally getting to that point and those questions come up, to reach out. And next up, I think we have Mark.
Got to me early, so I'm just trying to get my slide ready. I'll be just a second. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Put in presentation mode.
Yeah, it's covering, of course, 3 monitors open. Oh boy. Hopefully this works. Yeah. Well, I don't think you can see the full screen, but
Yeah, down at the lower right there, the little,
oh, gotcha. All right, thank you.
you just hit that button there.
Yeah, I have 3 monitors, so it's there we go.
There you go.
Okay. Can we see it now? This starting one.
I see that you pressed it. I'm not sure it's got there yet for some reason.
Nothing's advancing on my screens. Well, so can you see if I go from screen 1 to screen 2?
We're just seeing your title slide right now. I don't know
Okay.
if you move to second slide or not.
All right, I'll just manually do it.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. My name is Mark Soika, and I'm one of 2 SBIR SDTR team leaders at the DOE Office of Science Consolidated Service Center, Chicago office. And I will be discussing an important topic which impacts each and every one of you: the proper administration of your Phase 1 SBIR or SDTR award. I'm sure you're all excited to get your award and start working. I know some of you are still waiting for that. Hopefully an award will be made in the next week or 2. But proper administration of your award is equally as important as the work you're performing. So when your company's authorized individual signed the standard form 424 and submitted your application, whether or not you knew it, your company was agreeing to comply with all terms and conditions. I understand that's a lot of information to understand, but that's a condition of receiving financial assistance. To help meet the compliance requirements you agreed to, I will highlight some of the key terms and conditions and reporting requirements that I believe are of great importance. My presentation today will consist of site visit findings, the importance of knowing your terms and conditions, award attachments, including special terms and conditions, federal assistance reporting checklist, or commonly referred to as the reporting requirements, a general terms and conditions, as well as revisions to the award requiring prior DOE contracting officer or CO approval, current and pending support, disclosure of foreign relationships, and closeouts. Over the last few years, my office has, along with our counterparts in our financial services group, conducted site visits both in person and virtually. And unfortunately, due to workload, we haven't done that this past year, and hopefully we'll get back to that. But the point of those site visits was to check for compliance with the award terms and conditions. In doing so, we reviewed ASAP draws and supporting documents. We performed accounting system reviews to ensure proper segregation of costs. We did property or equipment reviews for those awards that had property on the awards. We also answered recipients' questions that they had for the program. Some of my next 2 slides will talk about some findings that we encountered doing these site visits. The main one was recipients did not always have adequate support for their ASAP draws. They were drawing down the ASAP in advance versus reimbursement. For-profit entities are not allowed to draw down funds out of ASAP in advance of incurring the expense. A company needs to first incur that expense before they draw down funds to reimburse themselves. And the timing of that is determined by whether a company is on a cash basis form of accounting or an accrual base of accounting. If a company is on a cash basis form of accounting, they have to pay that expense out of their own funds before they draw down funds out of ASAP to reimburse themselves. If the company is on an accrual basis, they can draw down those funds when they book that expense in their company accounting system. Companies a lot of times could only provide cumulative job cost totals for their spending on their award, but they could not give us a snapshot. So say a company drew down funds for $50,000 on January 15th of 2023. the company couldn't show us an invoice, and that showed what portion of their budget costs made up that $50,000. They only could show us cost data from grant start to the current point in time. But many of the companies had the capability, they just didn't know that they had to show that a job cost by invoice, and that was easily rectified once they knew it. Some other findings we ran across was that companies were missing quarterly financial reports. For those companies that had property or equipment on their awards, many of them could not or weren't tracking those costs or that equipment properly. Some other findings were that for those companies that had equipment, some didn't have adequate property insurance. It was not at full replacement value. Some other instances where a company had moved and didn't notify DOE of that new address. And lastly, for travel, one company was touting their robust travel requirements and systems, and then when we went through the information, personnel at the company were submitting invoices for travel that were higher than the company policy and actually were reimbursed above said policy. So I guess you're asking, when a company is determined to be non-compliant, DOE has various remedies at its disposal. And this slide, I won't go through everything, but it lists both administrative and non-administrative remedies that DOE can use to try to get a company back into compliance. And the administrative remedies range from, we can remove a company from ASAP and put them on invoicing. So in order to get paid by the government, a company has to submit an invoice. We can temporarily withhold cash payments until the issue is rectified. We can deny a company future SBIR, STTR applications due to poor past performance. And if a company is in phase 2, we can withhold or deny a company's continuation into year 2 of phase 2. If those things don't work, DOE can disallow costs in total or in part. We can suspend or terminate an award. We can also recommend a company be suspended or debarred, and then or take any other remedy that may be legally available, as such as taking a company to court, which we don't like to do, but we have done it. So if you're asking, is DOE really going to know if I read my terms and conditions? The answer is yes. And here's some examples of when we found out a company was not in compliance. These are actual cases of phase 1 STTR. At closeout, we found out that the company's partner or research institution didn't maintain the minimum level of effort, and that resulted in DOE recouping $18,000 in costs from the company for that non-compliance. A separate company, there were 2 individuals that were indicted and found guilty of committing wire fraud and identity theft, falsification of records, and in that one, DOE recouped approximately $150,000 because of the increased scrutiny that DOE is placing on compliance, whether it be because of the Department of Energy's Inspector General or the General Accountability Office performing audits of the program. We're trying to help you guys understand and comply with your terms and conditions. And the main takeaway of my presentation today is education. A lot of this information, the more you are aware of your requirements, hopefully the better informed and prepared you'll be in maintaining that compliance. The award that each of you receive through FedConnect, and that award is called the Assistance Agreement. That document and award transmitted various attachments shown here on this slide. I'm going to highlight several of these attachments, particularly the special terms and conditions, the federal assistance reporting checklist, and the general terms and conditions in my next few slides. The special terms and conditions is a document used to promote more uniformity in the DOE financial assistance awards and ensure that awards are include the appropriate award terms and conditions and reporting requirements. And as a result, many of the clauses contained in the special terms and conditions in your awards are also contained in other financial assistance awards. The special terms and conditions incorporates the provisions stated in 2 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, as amended by 2 CFR Part 910, which is the DOE specific financial assistance regulations. The clauses shown on the slide are some of those clauses that I feel are very important for you to be aware of. Clause 1C is the award project period and budget periods. This lists the government's share and the value of your award and the time period for that award. Clause 3.2 is the payment procedures. And as I stated before, it's reimbursement through ASAP for the majority of awards. However, if any company has had some poor past performance, or there are some issues, particularly in the financial aspects, that may be high risk, the government may put a company on invoice, and as a result, you would have a different clause than 3.2 for that payment procedure. Clause 7.1 is rebudgeting and recovery of indirect costs. And that clause pretty much just states that companies in their budget, well, after when you submit a budget, you're giving your best estimate of what those costs for that performance would be. But the majority of what the cost that we're paying for is research. A company should not, over the life of the grant, be slowly pulling money from research and putting it towards possible increases in indirect costs. We do understand that costs do go up and your rates may change, but a company should try to stick with their awarded budget rates as close as possible. If a company had proposed and was awarded equipment, their special terms and conditions would contain clauses 25A, D, and G, and those are just 3 clauses related to property. The next attachment that I'd like to talk about is the reporting requirements. And as I know, it's this is just a snapshot of page 1 of your assistance, well, the reporting requirements that was transmitted in your award. The main takeaway about this document is it names or shows 3 things. On the left-hand column is what is required to be submitted during the performance of your award. The middle column indicates how often that requirement needs to be transmitted to DOE. And the last column indicates where you're submitting that requirement. The main requirements for phase 1 are the RPPR, or Research Performance Progress Report, which describes a recipient's progress during the first 3 months of the phase 1 project period. In special instances, a special status report might need to be submitted, which typically isn't needed, but if so, it's required within 5 calendar days of an event. And please refer to page 4 of the checklist for examples of when a special status report may be required. Another item that needs to be submitted during the performance of your award is a quarterly financial report, or standard form 425. The SF 425 must be submitted 30 calendar days following the end of each calendar quarter. So March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, or December 31st, in accordance with the reporting instructions. And again, the address that report is shown in the right-hand column for that report. Another deliverable that needs to be submitted for any company that has expended more than $750,000 in DOE funds. Again, it's expenditures, not award value. So if it expends $750,000 or more during the fiscal year in DOE awards, it must have a compliance audit report, and a compliance audit report conducted for that fiscal year. And again, it's your fiscal year, not the government's. And there's been an increased scrutiny, and a recent GAO audit is trying to ensure proper compliance. Another two other documents that are newer to being required are the disclosure of foreign relationships and the current and pending support. And I'll talk about those in a little more detail later in my presentation. And lastly, I'd like to highlight that a life cycle certification is required and must be submitted at least 30 days prior to the end of the phase 1 project period. There are separate, well, whether a company has a SBIR or STTR, you would still use the same certification. The reporting checklist also identifies what documents are required at closeout. And many of those documents are similar to what you are submitting during performance of the award. But it is, but there are a final life cycle certification, a final property certification, regardless of whether you have property or equipment on your award. You also, for those companies that had tablets under your phase 1 award, a commercialization report is required when you submit your closeout documents, and that can be submitted with your final technical report. I would like to talk about the general terms and conditions, another attachment that is transmitted with your award, and the GTCs highlight those requirements which are especially pertinent to research grants in general. But it's not an exhaustive listing of all requirements applicable to your award. I would like to highlight in my presentation several important GTCs, and some of those consist of revisions to the revisions that require prior CO approval, any revisions to the current and pending support, reporting of disclosure for foreign relationships, property, any SBIR, STTR participation requirements for the awardee and the PI. I'm not going to talk about patent and patent rights nor rights and data because Mike Dobbs did a fantastic job in this presentation, so I will not address those. However, I would like to spend some time on a important change that we see quite often, and that's award revisions. And the first example of that would be any changes to the PI or any key personnel changes. If a recipient knows that they need to change the PI, they need to submit a request through the PAM system. And I know things do happen, but usually a company knows that that a PI is going to be leaving or changing ahead of time. And we ask that you, if you know that the PI is going to be changing, you need to please submit that request at least 30 days prior to that change. That will give us enough time to process that request. And any PI or key personnel changes need to be submitted through the portfolio analysis and management system, or PAMS. If you're changing the PI, that replacement PI needs also to be a registered PAMS user. And in that request for a PI change, you need to indicate how the current PI is going to be handled, whether or not they're going to remain on the project as some other capacity, or whether or not they should be removed from the project in total. And we also ask that the company's recipient business officer submit that request. And I bring that up in those cases when the PI is separate and distinct from the recipient business officer. And we ask that business officer is the one submitting these requests, because that person is usually, if separate from the PI, that person is usually more familiar with the requirements of the award terms and conditions. And that's usually who we converse with during the performance of the award. Some other changes that require prior approval would be any changes to subcontractors. So if you never had a subcontract in your original award, and now you want to add one, that change requires prior CO approval. Any novation or change in name agreements, that requires prior approval. Also work outside the US, and no cost or no fund extensions. And I'm going to spend some time talking about no fund extensions because that most commonly is the type of change that we get in our office that requires prior approval. So as the slide indicates, approvals for a no fund extension will not be granted for an award that contains a $0 balance. And the reason that we take this stance is if there's no money left, why do you need an extension? We're not going to keep a grant going for a company's line of credit with their bank, etc. So if a company has expended all their money, a no fund extension will not be granted. Also, recipients cannot grant themselves a no fund extension, nor can a DOE program manager. They do not have that ability to approve an extension. They may concur with one, but they cannot grant you an extension themselves. That can only be done by a CO, such as myself or other warranted individuals in my office. And we also ask that the requests for a no fund extension, again, be submitted by a business officer. And in that request, please indicate the project status, the reason for the extension, what the new proposed end date is going to be, and the remaining grant balance. I'd like to talk about two issues briefly that are new, and there are separate clauses that are included in your general terms and conditions. And that's the current and pending support and any changes to foreign disclosures. So for current and pending support, the reason that this is of interest to us and we do scrutinize it is these documents allow DOE to identify any potential duplication of effort, overcommitments, potential conflicts of interest, and any other sources of support. We don't want companies to be overtaxed, overburdened. We don't pay for overtime. So, I mean, we look at a maximum number of hours per year that a person can work is 2080 hours. So if current pending support is showing 4,000 hours because the company, an individual is, they're submitting applications all over the place. Realistically, if an individual is overcommitted, usually it's going to impact a company's ability to perform the phase one work on time. Disclosures of foreign relationships. A company is required, was required to submit this document when they submitted their application. Any changes to this disclosure of foreign relationships needs to be provided to the DOE contracting officer via FedConnect and to the SBA within 30 days of a change and 30 days prior to the end of the phase one performance period. And you would submit that with your final life cycle certification. Any penalty, some of the penalties that a company may incur for failing to disclose foreign relationships is a company could be required to repay all the amounts received under the award if there's a material misstatement that DOE determines possesses a risk to national security, or there's a change in ownership, change of entity structure, etc. That again, that any of these changes that could pose a national security risk. Further, the recipient may be subject to remedies established of what I indicated before in terms of termination and cost recovery. These are statutory requirements. So your grant's over, now what? Close out. The reporting requirements checklist indicates those documents that are required at closeout. And this slide indicates what those documents, what those final documents are. And this slide indicates what those are, and just to help refresh the due dates of when those documents are due. Final technical report, final financial report before 25, a final for that. Final patent certification, as I indicated before, a final property certification, final life cycle certification. And for any company that had TABA, a disclosure statement for that, and that can be submitted with the final technical report. And as I just indicated, a final disclosure of foreign relationships. And please always follow the instructions on the reporting checklist. If you have questions, please reach out to the assistance agreement administrator listed on page 2 of your award. And just, it's that person that you dealt with to get the award in place in my office. And this last slide indicates some points of contact for any post-award issues, which I just went over. If you have any post-award technical requirements or questions, please contact your DOE program manager listed on page 2 of your award. And as Mike Dobbs indicated earlier, any patent or IPL related questions may be directed to Cindy Ridge at the information shown here. And if you have any PAMS questions or any technical issues with PAMS, please reach out to the PAM Support Center. And with that, I will take questions, and thanks for your attention.
Mike, I can just read off the questions for you to help. So if there's an update to our CPS, for example, we receive other grants in addition to this phase 1, where do we send the revised form?
As I just indicated, the reporting requirements checklist indicates in the right-hand column where that document is to be transmitted.
Okay. For the audit report, is it required to be done after we reach threshold, or if we anticipate reaching it in that year? Do you do it then?
The threshold trips when you expend it. It's not in advance of, it's when you have tripped the threshold.
So when you have spent $750,000 in government funds that
In DOE funds.
yeah, in DOE funds that calendar year,
They're in that company's fiscal year.
in the company's fiscal year. Okay, thanks. Does 750K expenditure bar for requiring compliance audit include money sent to sub-awardees?
Yes, because they're billing you and you're drawing down funds to pay them. So yes, it's expenditures under your DOE awards.
We have a lot of questions on this. Can you explain the difference between 750K in expenditures versus government funds?
Right.
Does DOE help with the audit expenses if expenditures exceed 750K?
Well, first of all, again, it's expenditures, not award value. So just because you receive a phase 2 award for $1 million, typically that's $500,000 per year. You wouldn't trip the threshold in that regard. However, many companies have more than one award, phase 1 and phase 2. So again, it's the cumulative expenditures for DOE funds. It's a cluster. So if you receive multiple awards under this program, that is considered a cluster because they're all issued under the same requirements and have the same audit requirements, etc. So it would be all your DOE awards. And that could be with Office of Science, that could be with ARPA-E, that could be with NNSA. That's DOE expenditures in a company's fiscal year.
And for the second question, does DOE help with audit expenses if expenditures exceed 750,000?
Well, the audit isn't going to cost $750,000. I mean, typically what I'm hearing is with costs now, it's between probably $30,000 and $40,000 for an audit. Companies can recover those costs in their indirects. Now, that might not be instantaneous, but again, a company can't eventually recover those funds by charging them through their indirect costs.
Here's a question. Do key personnel changes, not PI, need to be submitted through PAMS?
Yes.
Or is an email to the grant specialist, program manager sufficient?
But as I indicated, the clause does say that all requests for PI changes,
This is not PI, not PI.
key personnel, again, I've seen this comment a few times in the questions. Key personnel is anybody that a company has put in section A of their budget.
Right. So the
So-
question is, do those changes to the key personnel get submitted through PAMS or an email
Yes.
to the grant specialist program manager?
Okay, they're submitted through PAMS.
Yeah. I know we do that for PIs, but I'm not sure. Okay. If we have foreign customers for non-DOE activity, do we disclose it in the foreign relationship disclosure?
Yes.
All right, that was fairly straightforward. A final life cycle cert is due 30 days before award termination date, but it has to be filled out that the work is complete. Why is this cert due before the award terminates?
Well, there's a section in the question, in the certification that says NA, which if the company is submitting 30 days prior and the work isn't done, they would say NA. But many times a company isn't timely when they submit that request. Isn't timely when they submit the required certification. So usually when we're asking for it, it's after that performance period has ended. So say like a company didn't submit it in phase 1, and now we're reviewing a phase 2 application for that company. We'll look and see, hey, did the company submit a phase 1 final certification for life cycle? And if not, then we'll ask for it when we're reviewing that phase 2 application. And usually at that time, if we're talking about, we're looking at phase 2 now, then the phase 1 should be checked completed in that certification.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions we have so far. We can just see if any more come in, but I think if we're good for now, we will go ahead and turn it over to see if we have our representative from the IG's office. I know we're running ahead of schedule, so maybe he has not dialed in. Oop. We got a couple more questions.
Okay.
Mark, could you elaborate on how you can change the IDC to cover the audit?
Well, you can't change it post-award, but you can put those costs in your indirect cost rate when you're submitting your new application. So say like in phase 1, your indirect rates didn't have audit costs, in G&A possibly. So now when a company's filling out their phase 2 rate application, they can now try to recover those costs in those new rates.
Okay. How much is the permissible remaining budget of an SBIR and STTR project for the DOE to admit a no-cost extension? How much is the maximum extension?
Okay. Well, I think what they're getting at is if the company has $1 left, can they grant a no fund extension? I mean, that's kind of gaming the system, it seems. But I mean, as long as it's not 0, we'll entertain the request for a no fund extension.
And with regard to the maximum extension, the thing you need to be careful about, like particularly for phase 1, is we cannot give you a phase 2 award while you're still on a phase 1 award. So there will be some instructions in the funding opportunity announcements indicating that you should not extend the period of performance of your current award. Otherwise, you will potentially jeopardize getting your phase 2 award for phase 1 awardees. For phase 2 awardees, it's not uncommon to see extensions of 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on the reason for the no cost extension. Typically, it's some research didn't go as planned, or some partner dropped out, or some equipment didn't become available, or was delayed, things like that. So I thought we answered this question about the key personnel changes being submitted through PAMS. Mark, are you sure that goes to PAMS like PI, or is that...
It used to. And also, I mean,
I know the PI does have to go through PAMS,
right?
But I wasn't sure.
Well, and during the summer, we kind of try to cut off when our office receives requisitions in order to process for fiscal year end. And usually during that time is when we entertain email requests for changes. But then we'll note that, you know, these changes will be reflective in the next mod, should you get one. If the clause does not say key personnel, then yes, then you could submit it to your grants management specialist or contract specialist via email. I'll go back and look at that. I mean, it used to say that, and I apologize if I didn't.
Yeah, I think,
read the clause.
I believe only.
If key personnel doesn't go through Pam's, then an email to your specialist is applicable and appropriate. Do not send it directly to a program manager because they cannot approve those changes. And I see a question here about equipment. It's $5,000 per item, not $7,000.
Yeah, so
That
if it
hasn't
exceeds
changed yet.
If it exceeds 5,000, it's considered equipment. Is that what you're saying?
5,000 or more.
Right, yeah, okay.
If it's 4,999, no.
Okay.
And that does not include shipping costs in the value.
Okay, all right, I think we've answered the question.
Oh.
Oh, I think Eric is finally with us, so I think we can transition to our final presentation.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great, Eric. All right, thanks, Mark.
Yep, thank you.
Hey, everybody. Happy to virtually see you all. Let me share my screen real quick and we can get started. And I apologize, I have a slight cold right now, so if I just start randomly coughing, bear with me. So hopefully you guys can see my screen now and the presentation that I have up. If you cannot, just let me know. I will.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Eric Halverson. I am a special agent with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General, currently assigned to headquarters operations, where I kind of live between our proactive space where we develop cases like federal cases. And also on the other side, I work with new funding that the department has received, trying to create new ways to stop fraud and stop people from stealing our money. At least that's the hope, generally speaking. Just as an administrative thing, if you guys have any questions, obviously put them in the chat. At the last slide, we'll have my email along with our hotlines email. If anything comes up, feel free to send me an email, or if you want to talk about something more in depth, feel free to do so. Ultimately, I'm here today to talk to you about fraud awareness and the commonality and potential consequences of committing fraud within the SBIR STTR program. So the first thing that people generally ask is, what is fraud? You'll see on here, you know, a lot of different definitions that you should understand, or at least take into consideration if you plan to commit fraud. Ultimately, what we care about is an intentional deception through misrepresentation or omission of material facts for the purpose of illegitimate gain, gain primarily being money, but not always. Sometimes it's theft of intellectual property. Sometimes it's taking something that the government should have some kind of a right to and then patenting it in a foreign country. We've had all kinds of things happen, broadly speaking, across the complex, and SBIR STTR program is no different. In fact, if you're ever bored and want to fall asleep early, you can Google the Government Accountability Office and SBIR fraud. You will see that they are now the subject of, I think, I don't know, like 4 or 5 reports to Congress about the SBIR program and all of the fraud that is conducted within this program. So it's a pretty heavily scrutinized program, and we just want to make sure that the money is going to the right people to fund the right types of research within America with the right companies that are doing the right work, because we want you guys to succeed as much as you guys want to succeed. We just want to make sure that the money is going to the right people. The other important part here to note is that we do not in any way try to hold people accountable if there's an innocent mistake. If it's an innocent mistake, we totally understand. Federal investigations, which I'm sure you might be aware, take a very long time to do. They are not quick by any means. So we spend a lot of time gathering facts about what happened and what was going on. We talk to lots of people. We can subpoena records. We can do search warrants. We can execute arrest warrants. We can do all kinds of things. And we do all of that to try to gain a holistic picture of what happened within that situation. And if it's like, we get the same exact credit if we say like, hey, there was no fraud here, or if we prove fraud. Like, it doesn't matter to us at all. We just want to make sure that, again, the right money is going to the right people and that people aren't lying to get something that they should not deserve, or get something that maybe they do deserve, but then instead of spending it in the right way, they buy a Ferrari or a boat. We've seen that quite a bit. Or, you know, they work in a foreign country and they're just using it to fund a foreign lab. Like, that's not right either. So we just want to make sure it's going to the right places. So when we talk about fraud, we generally talk about fraud existing in several phases. So there's kind of like an application pre-award phase has a different set of schemes that usually happen versus during the actual award. And so this is kind of this first step, what kinds of fraud schemes happen during the application process. And we see a lot of plagiarism. So that could be plagiarizing your own work, where you submit the same application to multiple agencies and then try to get paid from both NASA, NSF, and DOE for doing one report, but getting paid by 3 contracts. That would be wrong. Or just stealing stuff from other people's work. That is also wrong, and we tend to frown upon that. Yeah, duplicate proposals and awards by the same or multiple agencies for the same work. We don't like that. The government tends to frown upon it. So, you know, if you've already been paid for it once, like, be happy that you got paid for it once, and maybe don't try to get paid for it 2 or 3 times. Don't try to create fake email addresses or websites. You know, like, ultimately there's a whole bunch of schemes here. The biggest thing is just be honest with the contracting staff and with the people who are funding you. If they ask you a question, just be honest about it. Generally speaking, there's a ton of waivers that can happen if you're upfront and honest about what's going on in your situation. If you're located in a foreign country and you plan to use foreign workers and stuff, you know, I think there are waivers for that, but you'd have to answer a lot of questions. But if you have a chance for that potentially to happen, if you're honest with it. If you're not honest with it and you try to pretend like you're not in a foreign country and then you get caught later on, it'll be much, much worse. So the bottom line is to be honest and allow people to make an informed decision about what's going on in your situation, instead of, you know, like us finding out later that you've been lying the entire time, in which case everybody will be upset with you. And ultimately the bottom line is, like, can the company that you're running actually support the work that you say that you can? That's a big determining factor, both for us and for prosecutors within the legal space that choose whether or not to take a case. You know, if you completely make up what you can do and what your capabilities are, and you claim to have all these people that are these scientists that are specialized in all these different areas, but none of them actually exist, or they exist, but they have no idea that they're assigned to a project because you just put them on a letter of endorsement or support, or you just made it up, that would be a problem. Or if you claim that you have, you know, this immaculate clean room with all these lasers and all these different things, and then we find out that it's actually like a Dunkin' Donuts, then we're going to be upset, probably rightfully so. And that is going to be, this was an actual submission that we had. So the applicant maintained a 4,500 square foot state-of-the-art technical facility, including 3 clean rooms, 10 laser benches, and a variety of laboratories. These were the pictures that were submitted in support of that application. When an address check was run, and just to be honest with you guys, we do run a lot of address checks. We'll bulk screen all of the addresses that are submitted within the application data. We will look at Google Earth. We will send people out to actually do spot checks. We'll do site visits. We will ask questions of people. Like, these are all things that can happen during this process. And again, if you're honest, like, totally cool. But if we go to a place and we expect to see this laboratory and we end up seeing Dunkin' Donuts and Baskin Robbins, or we see, you know, just a paper sign. We've done search warrants where we've gone to addresses of places that claim to be economically disadvantaged businesses, and it's literally just a door that nobody's ever entered, and there's a bunch of mail that was slid underneath the door that's been there for months and months, and the company is actually based at a university in, we'll say, hypothetically, California. We're going to have some issues with that because we were awarding, or the government was awarding, based on the knowledge that we are supporting an economically disadvantaged business. And then you know, it turns out that it's actually like a university and grad students are doing all the work, and it was an SBIR, not an STTR. That would be an issue, you know, for the government to try to figure out what they need to do to make that right. So again, you know, if you're based out of Baskin Robbins, I don't know, maybe that's hard to do the work right, but maybe you're based residentially, and that can be okay depending on the type of work that you're doing. But if you're doing nuclear research and you're not Doc Brown creating a time machine in your garage, you know, we might have some questions, and we might show up and ask those questions. So best just to be honest and help everybody be successful and make sure that this program stays up and running and that the money is going to the right people. And so as we move from what type of fraud was found, now we're not in the application process anymore, but we're actually in the well, I guess we are still in the application process. So again, we're doing all of these things are important to us. So it's already been when the work has already been completing, but you want funding and you say you're going to write a report, but the report's already done. Again, the equivalent work or the duplicative funding, unauthorized use of facilities. So if you're a small business who got an SBIR and but you're actually also a university employee and you want to use your grad students and you want to just use your university resources and labs, that could cause a problem because that's not, these things are awarded based on the capabilities of the small business concern, not the university laboratory. We would do that, you can award that through an STTR, like you could apply through that means and you could be honest about it and then we'd be very happy with you. Or, you could put your address as an international mailbox forwarding center claiming that you're in America, but really you're in a foreign country, in which case we find it and then we get upset, which is fair, right? And then the other side of this is called fraud in the inducement. Essentially, this is like lying on all of the forms to get us to award something to make you look like a very good company. And then ultimately we find out that all of the letters of support are falsified, or there's a conflict of interest that you didn't disclose to the government, and you're tied to, you've paid off a university employee to write letters of support on behalf of your business, and they don't really exist, and the university isn't really going to help you. Like, those are all things that matter to us. Excuse me. So it's just, Then we move on to during the award. And during the award, there's going to be a slightly different set of schemes. I'll let you read this real quick while I drink some. While I drink some water. So again, just to keep all of this in mind as you move forward. There's a lot of different rules within this program specifically. And these are some of the more important ones. Excuse me. So primary employment's a big one. 500 employees or less, including the employees of any affiliate organizations, is really important. And then the PI being primarily employed by the small business and not somewhere else. The amount of work that's done, who you're partnering with, all of these things matter. And again, it's really just about honesty and transparency. As long as you're willing to be open and upfront with the government's generally willing to be very honest and forgiving of what kinds of work you're doing. But again, the research and development should be done in America, in the United States. This is important because it is America's seed fund, not, global seed fund. So this was the address that was provided on an application. But this is where the work was actually done internationally. And we've seen a rise in this over the last few years. Just generally overseas, a lot more work is being done and funds are being funneled to foreign universities, foreign governments, and just foreign research sites. So there are consequences if you break the rules. We will conduct an investigation. We coordinate all of our investigations, both civilly and criminally, with the Department of Justice. You can face potentially an $11,000 add-on for each count of false claims. So every time you lie on a certificate or a certification, every time you lie to the government, every time you submit an email with a false, with a lie in it, we can tack on an $11,000 penalty for each one. Generally, we also go after the entire contract amount. So we won't just go after like, well, the fraud was 50,000, so that's what we want back. We'll go after the entire amount of the award, along with any fines and penalties that we can. Generally speaking, we try to do criminal prosecutions first, followed by civil and administrative remedies. And we can also seize criminally like things that you own, like a house, in order to satisfy the forfeiture fines that were imposed by the court. So if you're ever bored, you can Google SBIR and fraud, and a bunch of Department of Justice press releases will come up. You'll see the kinds of fines and penalties that were imposed. You'll see that some people get jail time. There's a ton of civil penalties, in which case we can try to go after triple damages. So 3 times what the contract was actually valued at. But these are some of the normal things that we kind of go after. Again, like I said, we can go after triple damages and adding on $11,000 for each false claim. And with civil liability, we actually don't need to prove that you knew that there was intent to defraud. We only need to prove that you acted with knowledge, which is defined as deliberate ignorance or reckless disregard for the truth. So like, you sign everything and then we interview you and you say, I didn't even ever actually read those, so I didn't know I was breaking the rules. That would just be reckless disregard for the truth. Maybe it's not criminal intent that you knew what you were doing was wrong, but it is still deemed an acceptable level of knowledge within the act, because you're signing a contract and you knew that you should understand the rules of that contract. And the SBIR program has very specific certifications, both a pre-certification and a post-award certification. So they're kind of sandwiched in there, and the knowledge is kind of proven that way. The other thing is that people within businesses can file what's called a qui tam, which is Latin for a very long phrase that ends up saying a lawsuit filed on behalf of the king, essentially is what it means. And an employee can file a qui tam with the government saying, hey, I know this company is committing fraud. And then that employee can actually get 30% of what is recovered by the government. So there's a lot of people that will do this and they'll end up making a lot of money. But there's a lot of help from the government to try to help support people who are doing those types of acts. And it helps us hold businesses accountable that are committing fraud. So if you know of some fraud that's occurring within a company and you want to file a qui tam, you could contact me and I could put you in touch with the right people, or you could just Google qui tam and you'd be able to find the appropriate avenue to report such a thing. Once we've gone through kind of criminal and or civil remedies, and we can run those concurrently, like we've had a criminal case against the people within the business that committed fraud, while we've also been running a civil case against the company itself. And then once those two are settled judicially, we will then go after administrative remedies. And those are things like suspension and debarment, where we can stop both the company by name and the principals of that company from doing work with the federal government for a set period of time. Generally, it's between 3 and 5 years when it is the amount that a company would typically get suspended or debarred for. And during that time period, it's reciprocal, so they can't do business with any federal entity. And there's a lot of drawbacks as well for like a university that receives federal funds would have a very hard time funding an employee or giving federal monies like a federal research grant at a university to an individual who is suspended or debarred by name, because it's all reciprocal, and that funding cannot benefit an employee who's under that type of an administrative sanction. So it's important to keep all of that in mind. If at any point you're like, I could just lie on all these forms and totally get a bunch of free money, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it for you or for the business, and it's certainly not worth it for the program and the people that need that money to get their research and development, off the ground. And they might have a really good idea. We don't want to ruin the ability for people to do that. Yeah, ultimately, at any time, the government retains the right to examine the status of an SBIR. So at any time, we can say, we'd love to see your receipts. We can issue a subpoena for your books. We can go out and do site visits. Government auditors can show up and request copies of employees' project logs and what they're working on. I've showed up to many houses and just knocked on the door and asked them like how the project's going. Generally, most people are great, and they say, look, come look at my research. I'm actually just finishing my PhD in research methods and statistics. So I enjoy talking to people about their research. And one thing I know about researchers is that they generally love to talk about research. So, you know, the ones that are doing great are usually really happy, like, hey, come in, let me show you what I'm working on. Let me tell you what's going on. Let me explain to you the research and what's happening. And I love to hear it. We've also had other people show up that knew nothing about the project at all and ended up getting into a lot of hot water. So just understand that, you know, you are getting a lot of money from the government, and the government's happy to give it to you to do your project, but there are strings attached to that money. So you need to keep that in mind. I apologize for my coughing, but ultimately, when you think about reporting fraud, these are kind of the important things for you to consider. Really, our job in the OIG is to promote the effective, efficient, and economical operation of the department's programs and operations. We do this through audits, inspections, and investigations, but we also do other administrative reviews. We have our own data analytics division that all they do is proactively screen businesses and the work that they're doing to make sure that they are the appropriate businesses to receive our funds. That includes analysis of metadata like email header data to see where, like, are these emails coming from overseas? Or are they actually coming from US like they claim to be? I'm again with the Office of Investigation, so we're responsible for investigating fraud acts, specifically criminal and civil acts. And this includes, you know, any crime that affects programs, operations, and government funds. If we end up investigating something and there's only a small government nexus or a DOE nexus, we will also work with other both federal and state entities. That includes everybody from the FBI. We've worked with Homeland Security quite a bit on international things and intellectual property issues. We've worked, yeah, pretty much every state agency you can imagine, every federal agency you can imagine. We're happy to partner with all of those things as we move across different fraud schemes. But again, only centering on the people who commit fraud. You know, we have a lot of agents, but we're typically running between 8 and 10 cases at a time. And when we do that, we don't have time to spend a lot of effort on like innocent mistakes. That's not what we're here to do, right? So if you had an innocent mistake and you're like, oh, shoot, I said it was going to be X, and I actually ended up buying Y, and it was slightly more expensive, just communicate that with the Department of Energy, communicate that with your administrators, your grant administrators, let the government know what's going on, and let them make an honest determination based on what's happening. And that will get you like through 95% of the potential issues that could happen versus, you know, just hoping nobody finds out what's going on. We really do care about this stuff, and we want the money to go to the right places at the right times for the right things. So the bottom line is just to be honest, over communicate changes with the department, ask questions if needed, seek waivers, because we want you to succeed. You'll see on here our email for our hotline, the IG hotline at hq.doe.gov. You'll also see my email if you are like, oh, shoot, I know this other company is committing fraud, or I would love some more information about how to make sure that I'm doing it the right way. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm very happy to take your call. You'll see the phone number at the bottom is my my work number. So I'm in Denver, so I'm in Mountain Time, but feel free to shoot my phone call or a text and or send me an email if you have any questions or if you want to cover anything else here, and I'm happy to do it for you. That is all that I've got. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right, thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. And I think we actually have ended up earlier. This webinar usually goes longer because of questions, but I think we're okay on time. We do have one more question here. I don't think it was related to your talk. I think this is more general about just a question about changing the PI between phase 1 and phase 2. Are there any issues with that? So that's really more of a, you know, and again, the focus of this one is administering your grant, not necessarily some of the technical issues. I mean, the reason for changing your PI is probably going to be more technical in nature, something you might want to describe, you know, discuss with your program manager. So anytime you change the PI, if you do it between phase 1 and phase 2, this will just show up as the PI for your phase 2 application, and it will be evaluated just like any other phase 2 application on the merits of the application, the qualifications of the PI to oversee that project. It's not something that's necessarily frowned upon. And again, just in the business world, there's a lot of, turnover, employee turnover and things like that. So it's not unusual to see PI changes in our projects. It's not common, but it does occur. And again, I will just, since we're ended early, I will open it up to anybody who has any other general questions to any of the speakers today. This is, I think it is, I don't know if Mark is still on. I think we lost Mark, but there's a question about a quick intro on how submitting to ASAP for payment works. Since Mark isn't here, I will say ASAP is really a drawdown. So unlike like an invoice system where we would pay you, you submit an invoice, we pay you. There is nothing to be submitted to ASAP for the payment. You basically withdraw. It's on a trust system that you are, again, as Mark had indicated, you are withdrawing funds commensurate with your expenditure of funds for the research. And he went into detail about it. It's a reimbursement-based thing, but you are not submitting anything ASAP. You are actually just drawing down from ASAP. Any other questions? When will the STTR grants be announced and finalized? We have not received any updates from DOE other than will be granted toward the end of this month. Well, given the end of the month is only 2 days away, it should be fairly soon. I think the one thing that usually holds up our STTR grants is the commercialization or the commercialization rights agreement between the university and the small business. That's a separate, unique requirement only for STTR that DOE has to receive and signed by a document certifying that that agreement is in place. That has traditionally been the thing where we have some very long lead times to get the STTR grants out the door. But if that's not an issue, it should be finalized with other grants as well. Any other questions? All right, and again, you can just send with the worst contact information throughout the presentations if you want to reach out to any of the speakers. And again, you can always just use our journal SBIR-STTR@science.doe.gov, and we'll route your question to the appropriate person. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thanks everyone for attending. One last question on indirect costs. If you haven't actually done an audit and your company's just forming, if you're a new awardee, just go ahead and reach out to your grant specialist to discuss that. Generally, you probably would have used something in your budget that you submitted for phase one, and they're going to honor that unless they find any issues. But probably going through your phase one award, you'll accumulate some cost data and you'll be able to have a better estimate for your phase two application. We get this question all the time: is delay in announcing that and you getting your phase one STTR award, will it delay your phase two? No. So the phase two schedule is already set for next year. There will be no delay. We have to run every phase one is competing against other phase ones for phase two. So we can't have a separate schedule for individual awards. And the question at the beginning, yes, we will provide a recording of the webinar. And the presentations will also be available. And yeah, if you attended and registered for the webinar, you will get a copy of the slides and the link to the recording. All right. Thanks, everybody.